The abrupt end of Power Africa raises critical questions about the future of energy access in Africa, where nearly half the population still lacks electricity. Operated through USAID, the program aimed to bring power to tens of millions of households and businesses across the continent, addressing one of sub-Saharan Africa's most pressing development challenges. Was Africa prepared for this change? And what does this mean for the continent's future development, energy security, and financial independence? Well, Nweke, Senior Consultant, Nigeria-Belgium, Luxembourg Business Forum, joins me for more on this. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure to be with you, Perpetua. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. As you're well aware, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has been immobilized in recent days, and we cannot underestimate the impact this will have across Africa. But I do not know if you saw this day coming and if you think Africa prepared for this day.
Perpetua, we saw this coming because Donald Trump told us, while he was campaigning to return to the White House, that he was going to do exactly what is now done. We also had indications that, from his first term, there was, some efforts at focusing on the United States of America and actually de-emphasizing America's involvement, in other parts of the world. So the best that people could have hoped in Africa, to be specific, was that President Trump didn't get elected or re-elected as president. But he has been re-elected. And so one of the consequences is that, he's actually seeing through what he had promised the American people that he is going to do. So this should not come as a surprise to anyone. If countries are not ready to absorb the disruption that this has brought, it is for two reasons. Reason number one is that the timing is so short and no one expected that is going to kick into action so very quickly. And then number two, money doesn't grow on the tree. And so, this would have to require some sort of reprioritizing by the affected, African countries to be able to mitigate the impact of this abrupt cessation of U.S. aid to Africa.
All right. The second part of that country is about whether or not Africa was prepared for it. I just want yes or no answer to that.
Africa is certainly not prepared for this. They would have to be prepared for this because, as we speak, there are estimates that, over the next several years, perhaps up to a decade, with the withdrawal of U.S. aid to South Africa, for instance, fighting HIV, will be about 500,000 deaths. Lives like yours and mine, Perpetua, that will be lost as a consequence of this withdrawal. Bringing it closer home to Nigeria, we do know that as at 2023, which is the last available figure, United States under USAID has actually pumped in some $1.02 billion into Nigeria. Perpetua, imagine withdrawing such funding, from services, from money available to run business, to run affairs in Nigeria, and then just imagine what that would mean. So the impact is going to be devastating. Of course, there will be some mitigation, and that answers to your question as to whether Africa is prepared for this. No, they are not prepared for this, but they would have to find creative ways to mitigate the impact.
Absolutely, and we'll get to talk about these creative ways on the show today. But then countries have actually started counting their potential losses. And for Nigeria, I think the burning one right here is the Power Africa, which, of course, President Donald Trump pulled the plug on, among other initiatives. How devastating do you think this is? Because you've talked about the HIV/AIDS, the health implication and all of that. But let's look at Power Africa. That's a huge one, don't you think so?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's a huge number. And related to that, of course, is the AGOA, which is in fact an act that promotes business linkages, export, particularly in agriculture or especially in agricultural sector, moving from Africa to United States of America. Now that has created a very, very positive exposure for a number of businesses in an area that Nigeria currently has as a priority, policy area, which is, diversification of the economy away from oil dependency. And we have seen the result of the Perpetua from the figure that was, brought out, I believe, 2 weeks ago by the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. We saw that in 2024, non-oil export grew by well over 20%. That's humongous figure, Perpetua. Now, the withdrawal of American aids, Power Africa included, is going to mean that perhaps, that over 20% growth that we saw in 2024 may not happen. I can't be certain about that. The reason I use the word may is because there are increasing efforts from different parts of the world. For instance, Nigeria-Belgium, Luxembourg Business Council has consistently over the past 3 years mobilizing businesses out here in Belgium and Luxembourg, to Nigeria to invest, and we're also seeing the result. And situations such as the one we're facing now with America disengaging from Nigeria from Africa actually means that some of these friendly nations to Nigeria will step up the game and actually find more reasons to invest in Nigeria. So Africa is not going to be left high and dry because, chambers of commerce like ours, CBL, ACP, and others scattered all across Europe are actually seizing on this opportunity, this vacuum that America has created to actually, take it as opportunity to engage more on trade and investment in Africa, Nigeria being the leading economy.
Right, I like your interest in trade and investment because basically what we're talking about is more about aid and not necessarily, trade and investment, which of course we know are very important to take Africa away from where it currently is as, a beggarly continent or whatever you might want to call it. But I have also heard some analysts say roughly $2.7 trillion has been spent in Africa or pumped into Africa in about 3 decades with nothing significant to show for it, adding that instead it has fueled corruption and even robbed Africa of a free market. These are proponents, or let me not use the word proponents, people who are saying that, well, damn the aid anyway, Africa has to grow regardless. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts on that, Perpetua, is the fact that, some of these, resources coming from, United States and other parts of the world may be robbed in the world aid, international development assistance and so on and so forth. But the reality of the matter, Perpetua, is that, some of them actually, favor America most. Let us look very, very closely. For instance, the technology needed to drive some of the activities there that are actually described as AIDS, development assistance, actually comes from the United States of America. The contractors that execute these projects are American contractors. And so at the end of the day, when you hear of $2.7 billion and so on and so forth, perhaps, only about 20-30% are actually pumped into, injected into African economy as fresh resources, whereas the rest actually go to service American businesses and the American economy. Now, the value of actually stepping up trade is because the emphasis of trade is mutual benefits. And that is the, honest, credible way of packaging some of these things. And that is why, some of us out here say that AIDS is fine, but trading with Africa is the way forward. And I believe that that is part of the mitigation that Africa should now, refocus on.
Right. Well, Africa and indeed Nigeria has critical mineral and natural resources. I mean, enough for it not to be energy, maybe this energy poor and dependent on foreign aid. Where did our leaders get it wrong, actually? And apart from that, maybe when we get back from that particular one, I'll throw more questions into the mix. Let's start with this. Where did we get it wrong?
What we are getting wrong, first and foremost, is huge level of corruption. I mean, when you look at the budgets in different countries of Africa, especially Nigeria, you see how much is being appropriated, and I want to put emphasis on the word appropriated. But then you ask yourself how much out of what was appropriated is actually drawn down. Let's take health and education, for instance. I mean, the target is some 12%, of the budget, and indeed, they rightfully, appropriate 12% of the budget to health, education, and human services, in general. What gets drawn down is usually, less than 5%. As a matter of fact, in 2024. We understand that what was drawn down is 3.2%. So you see, where does the other part go? That is the big question. Now, I do believe, just like most of my colleagues out here, that there is enough resources in Africa to ensure that nobody is left hungry to bed. But we have not been actually, utilizing the resources in the manner that it ought to be utilized. And even when they rely on these, foreign aids as they are packaged, they do not actually realize that not all of it actually stay in Africa. And there have been questions raised about, the judicious use of the little, the percentage that actually stays in Africa. So, in the final analysis, Perpetua, Africa should get more serious about emphasizing trade rather than aid.
Absolutely, emphasizing trade rather than aid. Still talking about trade, investment, and what have you. I want you to help us, talk about Africa's critical mineral resources. I really want us to drill down on that, especially looking at the potential. Nigeria, for example, we have a lot of reserves when it comes to gas or even fossil fuel, whatever it is, whether it's crude oil or gas, we have reserves that can take generations. But we are probably not just doing enough. And rather than utilizing some of these mineral resources or even the market, which Africa is also blessed with, we're going cap in hand.
It's sad. It's sad that there is a ray of hope. Ray of hope in the sense that, like I alluded to earlier on, in 2024, there is an increase in non-oil export, and part of it is, the mineral resources that you talked about. Of course, the potential is very huge, but we are at the moment only just scratching the surface. Now, I believe that our mouths in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, has been full with gospel according to non-oil export and so on and so forth. But we haven't quite applied ourselves credibly to exploiting them in a manner that actually makes bring consequential value to Nigeria. So that is why when you see the latest figure in 2034, you can only hope that it continues, that the curve continues to go up rather than deep and then up and so on and so forth. So I think the basic question to ask is, what has Nigeria done well in the last year that has delivered the sort of result that we see now? And the result that was delivered in 2024 is actually just, a very tiny bit of the potential that Nigeria has. And I believe that, supporting some of these, foreign trips that Mr. President has, undertaken, I believe that it's part of it. But also, he has to be more consistent in the foreign policy, especially trade and investment policies, because you can't drive all of these policies when your embassies are headless. I mean, they've got to, get more consistent in terms of sharpening the tools that will help to drive more trade, more investment. And, trade councils, business forums like ours, Nigeria-Belgium, Luxembourg Business Forum, are poised to, key into government initiatives, but also work very closely with the private sector. For instance, our key partner in Abuja is the Abuja Chamber of Commerce. NASIMA is working very closely with us. These are all very, very motivated, organizations and private sector, entities that are helping to drive trade and investment, and that's where the focus should be left on.
Well, you can say that again, but what happens to Africa? I mean, regionally, we can do so much within ourselves, and we also have AFTA and some other initiatives, whether it's Africa Energy Bank, African Development Bank. We have these banks that can also help in resource mobilization and so many other things. So talk to us about how we can actually deepen these opportunities that lie within.
Absolutely. I'm happy you brought up, these bilateral financial institutions and looking inwards. I mean, we have seen in the past half decade or a bit longer what Nigeria's Dr. Akinwumi Adesina has done at the African Development Bank in terms of, some of the instruments that he has developed in engaging different African countries, including Nigeria, in sectors like agriculture and all of that. One can only hope that, such initiatives are actually, stepped up and doubled down on. And then inter-African trade is also very, very important, which is why, when we look at, efforts like, creating single currency for Africa, we actually applaud such initiatives, because these are things that will help Africa to grow. And then you think of other issues that are militating against inter-African trade. For instance, the free movement of people, goods and services, and people, where Dangote flagged off recently the fact that to travel to different countries of Africa, you have to have some 35 different visas. That's complete rubbish. Africa has got to do away, through the AU, they've got to do away with all of those, and closer collaboration with International Monetary Fund, is very, very important. You've seen how much energy the current president of Nigeria has pushed into taking away all the, inadequacies and inequities that surround, tariffs and international trade agreements, and working very closely with Nigeria's international partners to see that some of these, disadvantageous tariffs and trade agreements are actually, taken away. And Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is actually at the World Trade Center, also facilitating it within the limits of the current law. So yes, the future is bright, but Nigeria and Africa have got to apply themselves credibly to stepping up the game.
You said the future is bright, and I'm not sure if maybe I should say I agree. Let me not be too pessimistic. But let's look at the fact that many African countries are dealing with debt repayment, which leave little or no headroom for development. Some are under one IMF program or the other, and we also have those of them who are also trying to get into one debt restructuring program or the other. That's on the one hand. And then finally, I mean, we're having this coming up now. Doesn't it seem to you like a long and scary journey? Because you just mentioned some of the inhibitors.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a long journey, but it is not a scary journey. Now, I say this, beating my chest, because I do know that out here in Europe, where I'm speaking to you from, We do have our challenges as well. For instance, cost of living crisis, a saturated economy, and then what we do is not, feel dejected and, hopelessness setting in. No. What they now do, take for instance, dealing with the issue of saturation in the economy, is actually expansion. And where do they look at for expansion? It is Africa, because that's where you have, the largest concentration of, consumers, young and vibrant, not only as, a place to, offset products, that are made here, but also we are encouraging them, for instance, within the Nigeria-Belgium Luxembourg Business Forum, to actually set up shops in Africa in terms of setting up manufacturing hub, because for a start, the personnel to drive it is there, the resources, the natural resources are there, and like I said, the manpower as well. So set up shop, create jobs in Africa, and then from there you now service your economy here. So it is a win-win for us. So you see, these problems may have taken decades to create, but I do not believe that it's going to take decades to actually sort the problems out. No, because with deeper collaborations, I believe that, solutions are there, and, it takes humans to then walk to their fruition.
Well, I guess it will definitely also take political will, because that's something that sometimes seems to be missing. Thank you so much, Collins Nweke, Senior Consultant, Nigeria-Belgium Luxembourg Business Forum. Thank you for your time and thoughts on the show today.
Always my pleasure, Perpetual. Thank you for having me.